Okay, just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you're not one of the presenters, if you could disable your video just so that we can make sure we're seeing our speaker as big as we as we can, because the view allows you to sort of disable non-video participants, which works out a little well. So we'll be able to see Drew and Eddie and their presentations respectively. Want to give a big thank you to Eddie Nock and Drew Pihlainen for coming to present to us today. I'll just begin quickly with land acknowledgement and then a quick introduction of Drew, and we'll get kicked off. We're going to hold questions until the end of Drew's presentation that are about Drew's presentation. And then we'll have some time for questions. We'll do Eddie's presentation, and then we have a little bit of time if there's extra questions that we didn't get to about the first talk. But we'll just make sure that we're trying to be fair with question time for everybody, to the audience and the presenters. So to start, McMaster University, as the host institution for the Canadian Research Data Center Network, is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. We'll begin the session today by giving honor and thanks to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations, and to recognize our responsibility to respect and honor the intimate relationship Indigenous peoples have to this land. You can visit Native Land Digital, a space where people can learn more about the lands they inhabit, the history of those lands, and how to actively be part of a better future going forwards together. And without further ado, because you're not here to hear me talk, Drew Pihlainen is the program manager for the First Nations Data Center, and he's here today to talk to us about FNIGC and the First Nations Data Center. Take it away, Drew.
Thanks, Grant, and hello everyone who's joining us today. I'm calling in from unceded Algonquin territory here in Ottawa, Canada. As Grant said, I'm Drew, the program manager at the First Nations Data Center, which we call the FNDC. Brief little blurb about me. My background, academic background, was economics, and I spent some time working in research analysis in the post-secondary sector before getting more interested in issues around data governance, which kind of led me to working with FNIGC, where I've been for just over 4 years now. All within the FNDC, and 3 years as the program manager of the FNDC. Just a brief overview. This presentation, I'm going to try to keep it as succinct as I can. We're aiming for 20 to about 20 minutes, maybe a tiny bit more. First, I'm going to talk about the FNIGC, the FNDC. Generally how that works, the data we have at the FNDC, and then focus on one of the data products we have at the FNDC, the RHS, an overview of that, because that is the most common data we have requested. A little bit about our data online tool, which we have revamped in the last couple of years, and then a little bit about our data request review process. So first of all, a little bit about FNIGC. FNIGC is a nonprofit working to ensure that First Nations achieve data sovereignty in alignment with their own worldviews. The Cole's notes on that is that there are over 600 First Nations communities across Canada, and working through our regional partners, of which we have regional partners in each province territory. We work with communities in order to achieve data sovereignty, and that means, importantly, it means different things, or can mean different things in different communities and nations. One other part of the preamble that I just mentioned, because it is fundamental to the work we do in the FNDC and at FNIGC more generally, is the First Nations Principles of OCAP. Those are the principles of First Nations data sovereignty. And they very briefly stand for ownership, control, access, and possession. Essentially, to kind of distill this all down, that means that First Nations should have ownership over their data. First Nations data can be anything from health data, which it often is when we're talking about this, but that can also extend to stories, cultural knowledge, knowledge about the land as well. First Nations should have control over data that pertains to them, be able to access it when they want, and then also they should be the stewards of their own data. If you are curious, I'm sure that a lot of folks here have done FNIGC ZOCAP training. And a 30-second summary is it's hard to do it justice, but if you are interested, FNIGC does offer a fundamentals of OCAP course, which if you do want to access data at the FNDC is actually mandatory. So within the FNDC, we have a few main data sources. The first one, which is the one that I'll be focusing on today, is the RHS, the Regional Health Survey. We do also have data from another survey called the Regional Early Childhood Education and Employment Survey, what we call the FNREES. That is a one-off survey that was run just over 10 years ago now, with a focus on those social areas. The team is currently working on a new regional social survey, which is on the horizon, but I can't really say too much about that at the moment because it's in development. But as far as RHS goes, we can say that we will have RHS Phase 4 data coming. For those who are familiar, the most recent RHS survey was run in 15-16. Again, I'll be focusing a little bit more on it in the next few slides. So it's getting to be almost 10 years out of date. But RHS 4, the deployment of which was impacted by the COVID pandemic, has been in field for a few years now, and is wrapping up. So that's exciting for us. It means that probably next year, hopefully on the earlier end, researchers will be able to request data from the RHS Phase 4. So the RHS, the Regional Health Survey, what makes it different from the Canadian Community Health Survey, for example, is that it firstly was developed by and for First Nations, and uses a specific First Nations cultural framework, what we call the RHS cultural framework. I've got a diagram here. I'm not doing a dive into this is kind of beyond the scope of today, just with the brief presentation time, but lots of information on this in our RHS reports and on our website if you are curious to dig a little bit deeper. But suffice to say that it prioritizes First Nations measures of well-being. So the RHS Phase 3, as I mentioned, was in field in 2015-16. And it, as I've already kind of talked a little bit about sort of the generalities here, but it's a national level data set around well-being and health of First Nations living in reserves and in northern communities. The RHS Phase 3, the adult sample ended up being just over 12,000 adults across just over 250 communities. And it was primarily conducted in homes using computer assisted interviewing. And it was sampled using a sampling frame based on the Nock Indian Registry. So the RHS is again different from a Western developed community health survey because it does look at health through a First Nations perspective. The subject areas here are just kind of general topics that are touched on in the RHS, both RHS 3 and prior RHSs and RHS 4 as well. Um, things like language and culture, for example, are foundational to First Nations well-being and the First Nations wellness continuum. Um, whereas in a more Western health survey, they may not be emphasized as much. Here's just one specific example that I think illustrates well the importance of the RHS. This is a question for First Nations adults who required healthcare in the past year. What kinds of barriers they encountered when seeking healthcare. So you can see that there are some there that might be more broadly applicable. Waiting list too long. I'm sure many Canadians can identify with that these days, unfortunately. But then you also have reasons that have to do with NIHB, for example, um, and care down the list there. Care not being culturally appropriate. So this really allows the RHS data to be used um, in research that pertains to First Nations and takes their experiences into account. So the focus of this presentation isn't necessarily results, but I just wanted to pick a few out to kind of highlight, um, just to give you a taste. Although I will point you to our website later, where there is other data that you can browse. So half of First Nations, almost half live in rural settings. 38% in urban areas and about 15% in remote or special access communities. So those are communities that either don't have a road year round or are fly-in only. Um, nearly nearly 1/4 live in households considered crowded. Um, so that is more than one adult per room. And just shy of 3/4 of First Nations household considered their main water source safe for drinking year round. So you can already see why some of this information is especially pertinent to advocacy and program development and evaluation for First Nations on reserve and in northern communities. So I already teased a little bit about RHS Phase 4, but just to summarize, RHS 4 collection is wrapping up. There's still a few more that are trickling in, but what we're currently working on is receiving data sets from the regions, incorporating them into one master national data set, and then developing the cleaning and weighting syntax for that. Currently, we're not planning on doing a summary report for RHS Phase 4, but that is still an open question. We will be working with regions and communities to produce different reports at those levels. I think that's going to be the priority, at least at first. And then also the data will be available via the FNDC once it is fully cleaned and ready to go. Just a few. So again on RHS Phase 4, the subject areas, broadly speaking, and you know, I would say 90% of the items in RHS Phase 4 are consistent between Phase 3 and Phase 4 to allow for comparisons. There's a few changes that I just wanted to highlight, just a few specific ones, because we do get asked about them sometimes, and they do come up. One is around COVID. There are some survey items around COVID, the impact of COVID, vaccination coverage, which I think folks will find really interesting. Also around gender and sexuality, if you think about how we talk about those things as a society. If you think about where we were back in 2014 when when RHS Phase 3 was being developed, versus where we are now, our questions around gender identity and sexuality are a lot more nuanced, which will allow for some really fascinating analysis. So I'm sure after seeing some of these figures that I've put on the screen, you're excited to check out some of the data we have available. If so, you're in luck because the FNDC has something we call the Knowledge Lodge on our website, and that is a place where you can go. So in keeping with OCAP principles, it's not a completely customizable data dashboard, but we do our best to get any figure from a report that we've published into the Knowledge Lodge. So that's sort of our vetting process. Is that anything that's already publicly available, we put up as a figure here. Here's just an example of what it looks like, the kinds of things you can see. You can search by topic area, survey, and yeah. So a little bit about the FNDC. Otherwise, we operate, much like a StatCan RDC would, obviously with some First Nation specific processes, but researchers can request tables or direct data access. Those are the two most common types of requests that we get. Just a brief mention to say that at the FNDC, we are only allowed to release national level data. So any requests for regional or community level data do have to go through our regional partners, and they have their own processes around releasing that data. So once a request comes in, this workflow, probably won't look too out of the ordinary to folks. We do a technical review first, just to ensure that variables exist and what's being asked is possible. And then we do a methodological review where we just, as in the name, we just look at the methodology and ensure that it's in keeping with First Nations principles and appropriate for the question being asked. And then we have an in-house committee that we call the Data Access Review Committee. The name has changed since this figure was made. And essentially they look at these things. So looking at the request from an OCAP perspective, from a First Nations data governance perspective, are there sensitive variables? What's the risk, potential risk, compared to the benefit for First Nations? Is there First Nations involvement in the project? Has the requester done OCAP training? As I mentioned before, that's a requirement. First Nations involvement in interpretation of the results is a big one, and then also dissemination of results. That's it's always good to see projects that have a plan to share results with community, a solid knowledge translation plan. Um, and yeah, just because part of the reasoning of OCAP is that so often the First Nations who contribute to this kind of research don't end up seeing the end results. And here's, if you are interested in making a data request, I'll point you to our website there. This is what it looks like. It's kind of a dashboard that you log into, and you can submit your request, keep track of your request there. We just recently revamped this tool as well, which is why I'm showing a screenshot and maybe sounding a little more excited about an online tool that I have rights to be. And then the last main part that I just wanted to talk about that's important is the data sharing agreement. So this is where, it's hard sometimes to get excited about contracts and agreements. But this really is how a lot of OCAP and that First Nations data governance is implemented, where we talk about things like who's going to have access to the data, limitations on how it can be used that have to be in line with what was presented in the request. Intellectual property, this is a big one, where the FNIGC retains ownership over figures that are produced, and that's just to protect those outputs and ensure that they aren't misused in the future. Finally, we reserve a right to comment if we feel that data has been misused or used improperly. Although luckily we have never had to use it. So researchers are generally really happy to cooperate and work in collaboration with us. Last thing to mention, this is not really related to the data we have at the FNDC, but I just wanted to mention because it's something we're kind of excited about. Something we've been doing this year for the first time is a FNDC data mentorship. So in collaboration with the FNIGC bursary program, we offered this mentorship to students who were awarded FNIGC bursaries. And essentially we guide them through the process of developing a research question, using First Nations data to answer that question, and then with some support from our knowledge translation team here, coming up with some kind of a knowledge translation product to disseminate their results. It's totally optional, but we did get some good take up, and have some who want to use it to do some coursework as part of a capstone project, and then some who are doing it just pursuing it just out of personal interest. But yeah, so just a new thing that we're kind of excited about. And anything else? This was a very quick presentation. I think I'm just about kept time though. But there's lots of other information, more specific information on our website, which you can find at the FNIGC website. And that is all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. So before we go to our next presentation, we've got lots of time for questions. So if you have any questions for Drew about applying to access the data, or the data itself, or anything FNIGC, FNDC related, Drew either knows the answer or we'll get back to you. So we're open to the floor. If you want to just ask your question, there's a lot of us, so we can try just, sort of unmuting Wild West style. And if that doesn't work out, then we'll go to hands. The chat's also totally valid way to ask your question, and I'll just read them aloud to everybody. So floor is yours, research community. Okay, is there a way to receive any updates on when the results of RHS4 are released?
So that is one that I meant to ask our comms team before today. As you can tell from the start of my answer, I forgot. But I will sometimes we do kind of informal email update lists, but I know that there will be something going out, and I can probably, honestly, probably that information will get to Grant and the CRDCN folks when there is something. So I will, but I'll follow up with Grant directly. If you have a way to follow up with people who attended today, because I did tantalize you folks without giving any firm without giving any firm dates. Although that was on strict, that was the guidance I got from our survey team.
Just a quick look, like it does look that like the FNIGC overall, their Facebook page is very active. So I think that if you wanted to follow them on Facebook, you might hear something about the RHS. But definitely, yeah, we can be a conduit to this audience if Drew wants to push any updates. So Danya asks, are the number of people surveyed at the region/community level high enough to not have to suppress the data if consent from the community is given?
So, how the sampling works is the survey is sampled to be representative at the regional level and the national level. And when communities participate, they do consent to FNIGC and the regional partner releasing data at those levels. So, at a very aggregated level. What some communities do is, and if there's interest and funding at the community level, some communities will oversample so that they have a representative community level survey. Typically, it's the bigger, bigger communities with more resources who do that. Places like Akwesasne, close to Ottawa here, for example. And so that's an option, and we definitely support communities in that. But if a community doesn't do that, then you could end up with say 5 to 10 responses for a given community, which obviously isn't enough to do any research at the community level.
Okay, there's a question from Sonia. FNIGC, I don't believe has a newsletter, but Drew will correct me if I'm wrong. They do have a news page on their website that is, fairly up to date. So you could check back there to keep up. And as I mentioned before, the Facebook page, but FNIGC and CRDCN are friends, but no relation. So they're a completely separate entity. We're so pleased to have them here as our guest today to present on this sort of Indigenous data panel. But they don't do any kind of formal releases through us. Although if they wanted us to promote the regional health survey availability through our social media channels, we absolutely would amplify that message as they do for us when we have stuff to promote. So.
Yeah, and I think I can say pretty confidently that when RHS4 data is available, that information will be going out pretty loudly on our channels.
And Rob Gillizo has a question. Curious about how the data access processes work when considering legal or First Nation-Canada tables rather than traditional academic tracks. In particular, curious about data access for expert witness reports requested by First Nations or for work to inform tables within Government of Canada. So you're welcome to ask Rob to elaborate on that question if there's things you want to sort of clarify.
That's a great question. I can say that we do provide tables to the government, ISK, which uses tables to inform their program development and program evaluation. We do have some specific clauses in our agreement with them around how that data can be used. Um, but yeah, suffice to say that the government is is a client of ours. Um, as far as expert witness reports, we have actually had researchers request data for that process, so it's certainly something that's on our radar. Um, and if you have something specific that you wanted to talk about, feel free to contact me and we can have a more specific conversation. But suffice to say that that is something that's been done.
Okay, sounds like Rob's
Great.
going to follow up, so you'll hear from
Yeah.
him. Okay. So question from Arzu. No, the data is not obtainable via the RDC. It's available through the First Nations Data Center. So that is actually its own little data center in Ottawa, where you can go if you're accessing sort of the raw data. And as Drew mentioned, if you're requesting sort of a table or that kind of output, that would all be done through the First Nations Data Center by request. And Drew, clarify that if I've made a mistake.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we if you are accessing data remotely, we supply
Oh,
researchers
right.
with a mock data set to so you can use the mock data set to make some syntax, make sure it runs smoothly, and then we then take your syntax and run that, and then vet the tables and provide them to you. There is talking more long term. FNIGC is working on a much bigger project called the First Nations Data Governance FNDGS. The name,
First Nations Data Governance Strategy.
yes, the S was eluding me. Which and part of the FNDGS involves having regional First Nations data governance centers across our regions. There is in Alberta, for example, there is an organization called AFNIGC, which is basically already doing that. So long term, we're kind of hoping for physical regional data centers in the um, uh, in a similar vein to how the RDCs operate. But that's more of a long-term project.
So for now, if someone outside of Ottawa wanted to access, the best bet would probably be via like a code submission that they would develop
Exactly.
against the synthetic file.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just so to get into that, it's just the normal request process.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. Okay, are there any last questions to Drew before we move on to Eddie's presentation? And just a reminder, if you don't get to, it didn't remind you, if something occurs to you, we will have more time at the end for for like an open question to either presenter. But thank you, Drew, and we'll now bring on Eddie, who is manager of the Indigenous Surveys program, to present to us on the Aboriginal People Survey. Thanks so much. Eddie Nock, over to you.
Thank you. And I'll just get my presentation going here. Is that working?
We see your like PowerPoint window, not your slideshow.
Oh, okay. Not sure what's going on there. It worked earlier when we tested it, Grant.
We did, we tested it. Have you got, like, when it goes to, when you hit the share screen button, do you select like the presentation, or are you just sort of hitting start? Because I think if you're in the presentation and then you go to start, it'll give you the option to just choose the presentation window.
Okay. Still not.
Okay, do you want me to share your slides on your behalf?
Sure.
Let me just,
That'd be great. Thank you. Sorry about
oh, no worries.
technical difficulties.
Yeah, that's okay. Just grab them real quick. Okay, just for everyone, is that coming up okay?
Looks like it's working for me.
Yep, it's working.
Perfect. Okay, go ahead, Eddie. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Grant. Excuse me. Well, welcome to a presentation today on the 2022 Indigenous Peoples Survey. My name is Eddie Nock, and I'm a manager of the Indigenous Surveys program at Statistics Canada. I've been in this position for about 4 years now. I'm still learning every day. As we gather today, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that I'm on the ancestral lands of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. So I'm in Ottawa. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So what will I talk about today? Well, the objective is to provide a lot of information on the Indigenous Peoples Survey and some background, because it used to be known as the Aboriginal People Survey. And then specifically on the 2022 IPS, I'll give you some information on the sample design, some of the sort of unique strengths of the IPS, review some content and a little bit of content comparison to the previous version of the survey. And then I have a number of slides on key findings. And for those of you that may have seen the IPS/census data tours that were run by StatCan after the IPS was completed, may have seen some of that information already, but I think it's always important information to get out there. And then we'll go into questions. Next slide, please, Grant. So a little bit of background. So the first Aboriginal People Survey was in 1991, following a recommendation from the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. There were surveys also in 2001 and 2006. And now the current survey model, which is funded through Indigenous Services Canada, began in 2012 and was planned for every 5 years thereafter. So there was one in 2012, 2017. I'll be talking about the 2022, and the next one was planned for 2027. As I mentioned, there was a name change. So in 2022, we changed the name to Indigenous Peoples Survey from the Aboriginal Peoples Survey. And regarding the 2027 iteration, it was well underway. Content had been finalized. Actually, we had met with the funders and also numerous Indigenous organizations on content development. And I think we had an excellent questionnaire ready to go. But then we received word from this that the 2027 IPS was being paused. And to date, we at StatCan, we haven't received any updates. So we don't know if there'll be something done for 2027 or it'll get pushed, or we really don't know what the future of the IPS is right now. So that was very unfortunate news here at for us here at StatCan, because the people that work on this survey are very passionate about it, and it was just a huge disappointment. We were told it was for financial reasons, but we are hopeful that it will get funding going forward again. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea about how the APS/IPS has worked over the past number of iterations. Basically, there's been what we call a core question component and then a theme question component. So in 2012, the theme was education and employment. In 2017, it was economic participation. And in 2022 is children and families. And the plan for 2027 was cost of living, housing, and food security. So we can go to the next slide, please. So for the 2022 IPS, I'll just talk a little bit about the target population and the sample selection. So, of course, the target population is the Indigenous identity population of Canada. It was ages 1 year older as of April 27, 2022, living in private dwellings and excluding people living on reserves or settlements and in certain First Nations communities in the Yukon and Northwest Territories. The IPS sample was selected from the census or post-census, and it's those respondents who reported an Indigenous identity or ancestry on the 2021 census. So I think it's an important thing to note that although individuals with Indigenous ancestry are not the target population, sorry, I should say those with Indigenous ancestry who did not report Indigenous identity on the census are not part of the target population, but some of them are still included. A sample is still included because of something we see called identity mobility. So sometimes individuals will change whether or not they feel they identify as Indigenous over time. So we do include a portion of that in the sample. And I think it's important to mention also that there was a supplementary survey called the Indigenous Peoples Survey Nunavut Inuit Supplement, and that targeted Inuit enrolled under the Nunavut Agreement. So that was there in 2017 and again in 2022. So there's a very large supplementary sample of Inuit age 15 plus, and an additional set of questions specifically for that population. And that's to support the Nunavut Inuit Labor Force Analysis Project that is ran through ESDC, and StatCan is contracted to do the data collection for that survey or that supplement as well. Next slide, please. In terms of sample design, so we have excellent methodologists here. We're very lucky at StatCan, and they're an important part of the stratification that they do. They look at the domains of estimation and which groups need to be focused upon in order to get quality data and enough respondents in certain domains. Excuse me. I'm gonna grab a quick drink of water. Sorry about that. So there's different geographies that are looked at. So there's the Inuit regions, outside Inuit regions, province and territories, and there's consolidated Atlantic provinces that's targeted. There's targeted age groups that are listed there. And then there's the Indigenous groups. So Inuit in the Inuit regions, outside Inuit regions, combined Indigenous groups, and then in the larger provinces, there's a specific targeting of the groups, and then First Nation with off-reserve status and status First Nation living off-reserve. And one thing you may notice is in the age groups, 15 to 17 isn't specifically listed. So they were not a targeted age group, but they were still included in the sample. And we did get sufficient data to be able to report at certain levels on that age group. Go to the next slide. Thank you. So the IPS, it's a very unique survey in that it's the only national survey at StatCan that focuses exclusively on First Nations people living off-reserve, Métis, and Inuit. As I mentioned already, it's a post-census, so the census is the frame, which means the IPS can be easily linked with census information. The response rate for the 2022 IPS was 53%, and that yielded a sample of about 30,000 to work with. 53% is very low historically for the APS, IPS, but I'm sure you can appreciate this was kind of during the times that were still COVID, and we could not do a lot of in-person collection. We extended collection. We ended up doing a little bit of in-person collection in Nunavut at the very end of collection, but it was, to say the least, a very challenging time to be collecting the IPS. So it was a little bit disappointing that the response rate wasn't higher. But yeah, as Grant just, I see, posted there, it's still pretty consistent with other ones at the time. But historically, the IPS has had very high, close, over 75% in the past response rates. I already mentioned a little bit about that there's core and thematic questions, and for 2022, it was children and their families was the theme. Next slide. So yeah, as I mentioned, the IPS it targets Indigenous people, First Nations living off-reserve, Métis, and Inuit. And while it is a post-census, it goes much deeper than things that the census collects. There's an example there, like census asks with general labor force characteristics, like such as employment rates. But IPS goes deeper into experiences and things about job mobility, childcare impact on employment, covers topics on health, but also trauma, discrimination, and these things are not included in the census. But when you put the two together, because I said it can be linked so easily, it provides a very detailed portrait of Indigenous people in Canada for those First Nations people off-reserve, Métis and Inuit. The release of the 2022 IPS happened in August of 2024. And also there's a link there to a report, excellent report that was done by our analytical team here in the Center for Indigenous Statistics and Partnerships. And if you haven't read it yet, I invite you to do so. We can go to the next slide. So data disaggregation for the IPS. So like the census, it can be disaggregated using Indigenous identity groups and geographies. You know, in terms of what you can cross-tabulate, we always have to look, you know, at what the cross-tabulation is to determine if it can be released. Obviously, protecting confidentiality is very important, so there has to be a minimum number of respondents in a category and of sufficient quality. So as you cross more and more variables, sometimes it will be suppressed, but the IPS is a very rich data set that can report at very disaggregated levels. Okay, next slide. One thing that was, I guess, new, different for the 2022 IPS, there's one main analytical file, which contains, well, I guess all but 3 variables. But there was also a second restricted analytical file. And this is because we consider those variables sensitive. So for the 2022 IPS and IPS-NIS, there's the gender 3, so a 3-category gender variable, the sex at birth variable, and sexual orientation variable are in a separate file that's considered restricted. So, and this access to this is based on Stats Canada's guidelines. So researchers need to make a case and explain in their proposal why they would need access to the restricted variables to that file in order to do their research. So it's not that it's not available, but we won't share that file unless there's a very good reason and we think the research requires it. And I should mention, so on the main file, when we have non-binary persons, they're distributed into 2 gender categories, denoted by men plus and women plus. So just thought I should mention that. And yeah, next slide, please. So what were the topics of the 2022 IPS? As you can see on the screen, there were numerous topics covered. And it was really important that the core content stuff is still there. So you have a lot of questions about health and to extend that time series. But also there's a lot of new categories and new topics with questions. Some of the new things that are there were the trauma and discrimination questions, which are sensitive, but they're also important. And I want to mention that for before those questions went out in the field, our interviewers, it was a must that they did Indigenous cultural awareness training, but also we had a psychiatrist, and they went over the potential impacts of trauma and how interviewers could be sensitive when asking those questions, and if there was some kind of reaction, how they could possibly support that person. And another thing that was done, particularly for the victimization part. So if a person was completing the questionnaire, like there's in self-response, and they're answering questions about victimization, and someone came into the room or something, they could quickly hit a button that would hide the survey portion about victimization, and they wouldn't be able to go back in history or using the back button to get to it. So we tried our best, I guess, to put in very tools that could minimize impacts as much as possible. What else did I want to highlight here? There were new questions on access to services, questions on Jordan's Principle, the Inuit Child First Initiative. So we're really happy to have that included on the questionnaire, and there's some good information that's come from that. There was 18 questions, so a complete food security module that aligns with international measures for comparison purposes. In 2017, there was only the 6-question food security module, so we felt it was important to have that 18-question module on there, as did the funders, so that was good. So yeah, there's just so many topics. Questions on the COVID-19 pandemic. Hopefully that's the one and only time we need to have questions about a pandemic, but it was important to include those to get have an Indigenous lens on what happened during the pandemic for the Indigenous people. I think overall there's about 400 questions on the questionnaire, so it's not a short questionnaire, and it takes time and commitment from our respondents, and we appreciate that. But there's just so much information there for researchers to use. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I want to go through some of the key findings, and I'll remind you that the theme was children and families. So most of the findings will discuss theme-related questions. The hope is that it helps fill the gap of recent cultural relevant data for Indigenous children and their families. Yeah, you can go ahead, Grant. We can go to the next slide there. So this first one, this first chart is on language, and the reason we often start with language questions is that it's so connected to cultural identity and a sense of belonging and just general well-being. So I've learned this from my analytical team. It's something they always like to talk about very early in a presentation. So so in this slide, you can see that for children aged 1 to 5, 22% can understand or speak at least a few words of an Indigenous language. Differing numbers by off-reserve First Nation children with registered status, 35%, versus those without is 17%. And for Inuit children inside Inuit Unigat, 87% could speak at least a few words, versus outside it was at 37%. And for Métis children, it was 8%. Something we thought was important, and it was nice to see an increase, is that there were 2/3 of parents thought it was important for their children to know an Indigenous language, And compared to the 2006, which was the Aboriginal Children Survey back then, it was up from about half. So that's grown a lot, and we wanted to note that increase. We can go to the next slide, please. So this one talks about the proportion of children who participated in an Indigenous activity at least once in each activity at least once by Indigenous identity. So we're talking about things like harvesting or a cultural activity, and it showed 70% of Indigenous children aged 1 to 5 participated in at least one over the past year, which was an increase from 2006. And it was parents and grandparents were the most common source for helping Indigenous children learn about their culture and history. And it was about one third of Inuit children, about 1 in 5 Métis children participated in hunting, fishing, trapping, or camping at least on a monthly basis, and 1 in 5 for First Nations children living off reserve. So the next slide here, excuse me. So talking about childcare. So 56 of Métis, 49% of officer First Nations, and 36% of Inuit children use regular daycare or childcare, I should say, in 2022, which is lower than non-Indigenous children, which was about 64% in 2023. In terms of having their child care environment encouraging learning about Indigenous cultural values and customs, it was 30% for Métis children, 49% for off reserve First Nations children, and 64% for Inuit. So it was good to know that parents were reporting that their childcare environment had that cultural aspect. Some other things I wanted to mention on socioeconomic conditions was financial vulnerability. About 3 in 10 parents of Indigenous children reported household income was not enough to meet their household needs, which is a pretty significant percentage. And 45% reported household income could not cover an unexpected expense of $500. And the breakdown by identity is there as well. We can move to the next slide.
I just want to flag that we've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay. I can, I don't have to get through, like, we're going to be sharing these slides with the participants, Grant?
Yep, we are.
So if I don't get through all of them, I can skip over a few, and no, they're all important, but
no, I'm at your direction. I just want to make sure, because I can see we've already got some questions, and I'm sure people are eager to. But it's totally fine if we want to keep going. Okay, we'll see what happens here. On food insecurity, so the 4 in 10 Indigenous children lived in households that experienced some kind of food insecurity in the past year, and 14% reported living in severely food insecure households, and 16% of non-Indigenous households were food insecure. So that's a pretty dramatic difference. And in Inuit Nunavut, 3 in 4 Inuit children lived in food insecure households. Next slide.
We can probably skip ahead to the next one. Thank you. Oral care. I think it's for general knowledge now that oral care is a very important aspect in overall health. And it was good to see that almost 9 in 10 Indigenous children had seen a dental professional in the last year. But there are children with unmet dental care needs. There's some more information there about childhood cavities and so on. But just again, the breadth of the IPS and the number of categories it covers, there's so much room for a lot of research here. So we can keep going in the interest of time. This one I do want to talk about for sure. As I mentioned, questions on Jordan's Principle and Inuit First Child Initiative were new on the questionnaire. So what we found with Jordan's Principle, what we're told is about half of parents of First Nations children living off reserve had heard about Jordan's Principle. It was much higher with registered Indian status than without. And 1/3 of those who were aware of it had applied for it. And again, higher for those with registered Indian status. And among those who applied, 4 in 10 applied for education support, such as tutoring, 4 in 10 for medical supports, and 2 in 10 for mental health or allied health services. And then for Inuit Child First Initiative, 1 in 4 parents reported that they had heard about the Inuit Child First Initiative, and 29% of those who were aware had applied for it. And there was really no difference in Inuit Nunavut or outside. And again, education supports, medical support, and there was a 15% for mental health or allied health services. And I'll mention the link I had to the report that our analytical team did earlier. There's a lot more information in that on this topic. Next slide, please. So another thing we did was we did a core housing need indicator. So we're able to link to some information to assist in putting this indicator again to determine this indicator. So across all groups, renters were 3 times more likely to be in a core housing need than others. And one thing I should explain is, what is core housing need? So, and I need to read this myself. So, a household is in core housing need if its housing falls below at least one of the thresholds for housing adequacy, affordability, or suitability, and they would have to spend 30% or more of their income before taxes to pay the median rent of alternative local housing that is acceptable. So, that definition, I believe, is in the report. And if anyone wants more information on that, I'd be happy to share it. So yeah, renters were more likely to be in core housing than owners. Among First Nations people living off reserve, 23% of renters were in core housing need, while 8% of owners were. For Métis, it was 5 and 21% respectively, and about 1 in 10 of Inuit who own their own homes were in core housing need, and about 45% of Inuit renters. Maybe we'll skip this one and we can get to some questions. So thank you. And yeah, happy to try to answer some questions.
Thank you. There is a question in the chat. Equal parts question and comment. How are survey questions selected from one survey period to the next? And then the comment part is around, doing longitudinal analyses of these cross-section surveys is a little tricky sometimes when certain questions are dropped. So it's just more about like how are the decisions?
Yeah.
What's the consultation like?
Yeah. So I wasn't involved in the development of the 2022 IPS. I joined the team later than that, but I was involved in the development of the 2027. So I do know quite a bit about it. So I would say that yes, there are emerging initiatives that always play a role in what the theme for the IPS is. The funders, which are Indigenous Services Canada, CRNAC, and ESDC, have a say. But we did a lot of consultation with Indigenous organizations that were willing and had the capacity to sit with us and discuss important topics and questions. So when we decide to drop questions, it's not easy, and we do try to keep many core questions. But at the same time, we have to balance that with response burden for respondents, because, like I said, it's about 400 questions, the 2022 IPS, so we can't keep everything. So there are some very hard decisions made, and we do take into consideration the feedback from the Indigenous organizations that took part, and also we've had many discussions with the funders. And I should say that we're not talking separate meetings here. We sit in meetings and discuss together and give everyone a chance to provide feedback. So it's a long process. It takes time. But I think it worked very well for the 2027. I do hope there's a way back to have that in the field someday. I know for 2022, because of the COVID pandemic, there wasn't as much time for those consultations, and I don't think they happened to the same degree. But really, it is just a group effort, and we talked about what the theme will be and why, and try to put the right questions there to get the data needed with the least amount of questions, so that we can keep the core questions as much as possible. Excuse me.
Okay, so the next question is about the exclusion of on-reserve, which I think we understand why that has to be the case, but it's more a question of sort of harmonization. And is the 2027, is there any hope that we can get some harmonization between the on-reserve questionnaires we just heard about from Drew and the StatCan questionnaires, so that we can start to understand some patterns nationally and between nations?
Well, StatCan, we do share our content with FNIGC, and we do have contacts between the two organizations, and they're welcome to use our questions. We do like to get a copy of their questionnaire as well, and we do try to use the same types of questions. Sometimes it just depends on what the themes are and the focus for the different organizations. I don't know when we'd ever get to using the exact same questionnaire, because I'm not sure when or if that's possible. It would be nice, but I think there's still, seeing what Drew presented on the topics from the regional health survey, there's a lot of the same type of information. So I think a lot of it, can be compared and build sort of a total picture for Indigenous people in Canada.
Okay, so recognizing that we're a little bit over time, anyone who wants to stay is certainly welcome to, but we won't be surprised if some of you need to go. Drew, do you want to come back on camera, just in case there's more sort of general questions? This cat. Okay, anything else from our audience, either sort of spoken or written? Okay. Thank you, Susan.
I'll just mention one more thing, Grant.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the presentation that I believe that I sent, there's sort of a couple of appendices, and there's links to the tables that are available. So I'd invite the participants to have a look at those if they haven't. I figure most people know how to get to data here, the RDC group, but there's also a pump, there's the RTRA, there's all the tables available, and I also provided links for census information for Indigenous people.
Yeah, and we do have the latest IPS available in the RDCs now. So if you're interested in accessing the data directly, you can do that too. I did mention and put a link in our chat. We will be putting Eddie's slides on that page. I'll have to look back in our email, but whether we talked to Drew about circulating his slides to the group, I don't know. He's nodding, so maybe we did.
Yep.
Okay, so if you attended, sorry.
I was just saying I sent them kind of late on, but you're more than welcome to send them on.
Okay, so I think we'll arrange to pass the slides on via email for both presentations, and then if you need to grab the StatCan one, we'll have that on our site. Also, the recording of the session will be available on YouTube. So if there's any other questions before we say goodbye to everybody, we definitely appreciate everyone coming out on this lovely Thursday.
Just one final thing to add, just in response to Rob's question there. As Eddie said, we have a good working relationship with StatCan and meet with them semi-regularly. Although I'm not sure if there's ever been a desire to have the IPS near items on the RHS or vice versa, for that matter. So, but it's certainly an interesting question that I will bring to the next time we meet.
This is not a unique challenge to standardize data in international collections. I hope we can appreciate and have a little grace for StatCan and FNIGC in this regard. So, all right, thanks so much, everybody. Just a reminder, we do have the Census, the T1 Family File Plus presentation in October. So if you're an open mic regular, we'll see you for that one. And if not, I hope you have a great weekend and the rest of the week. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.